What if the road you were driving on simply vanished? What if the only person who could save you wasn't entirely human? The full, terrifying truth of that night goes far beyond any missing persons report. To understand what really waits in the shadows of those pine forests, you need to hear the story until the very last second. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the conclusion that changes everything. The road was a long, gray tongue of asphalt licking its way through an endless, breathing darkness of pine and fir. On either side, the forest was a solid wall, an impenetrable fortress of shadows that seemed to lean in, watching the only sign of life for miles. The sky above was a dull, leaden sheet, the sun a faded memory behind the clouds, offering a flat, colorless light that did nothing to warm the world below. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. On this lonely stretch of highway, a car moved, a solitary beetle of faded blue metal. It was a boxy, four-door sedan from another time, a 1990s model with rounded corners and a soft purr from its engine that was barely audible over the whisper of the tires on the pavement. Inside, the world was smaller, warmer, but touched by the same strange quiet that lay over the forest. The upholstery was worn velour, the dash a collection of simple dials and knobs. A faint smell of old coffee and peanut butter sandwiches hung in the air. Behind the wheel, Frank gripped the steering wheel with a comfortable ease, his eyes scanning the road ahead with a father's quiet diligence. His wife, Sarah, sat in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window, watching the endless parade of trees blur past. Her fingers absently traced the edge of a road map unfolded on her lap, a relic in an age just before such things became obsolete. In the back, the universe of the car was divided. On one side, a boy of about 10, Leo, had his nose buried in a comic book, his small flashlight creating a pool of light in the growing dimness of the late afternoon. On the other, his younger sister, Mia, maybe 7, pressed her face to the cool glass of the window, her breath making little clouds on it. "Are we almost there?" Leo asked, not looking up from his colorful pages. "Another hour, buddy," Frank said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "Just sit tight." Mia turned from the window, her brow furrowed. "I don't like these trees. They're too close." Sarah turned and offered a soft smile. "They're just trees, sweetie. They can't hurt you. Look, you can see the river down there sometimes." She pointed towards an occasional glimpse of churning, slate-gray water cutting a deep gorge alongside the highway far below. The car pressed on, a tiny ship on a concrete sea. The only sounds were the hum of the engine, the rustle of Leo's comic book page, and the low, static hiss of the radio, which Frank had been tuning, searching for a station that wouldn't dissolve into noise. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the speakers, clear and strong for a moment, a news broadcaster speaking about local weather. Then, as quickly as it came, it was swallowed by a wave of static. Frank reached to adjust the dial, but his hand froze. The static did not return to its aimless hiss. Instead, it coalesced, forming into a sound. It was a low, thrumming beat, like a single deep drum being struck at a steady, slow rhythm. It was utterly alien in the cozy confines of the family car. Boom. Silence. Boom. Silence. "What is that?" Sarah asked, sitting up straight, the map crinkling in her lap. "Some weird interference," Frank muttered, twisting the tuner knob back and forth. But the sound did not change. It was not coming from a station. It seemed to be coming from the radio itself, or from somewhere outside, transmitted through it. Boom. Silence. Boom. Leo lowered his comic book, his small face puzzled. It sounded like a heartbeat. The word hung in the air, inappropriate and chilling. Mia whimpered, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Make it stop, Daddy." Frank pressed the power button. The dashboard light for the radio went dark, but the sound did not stop. The deep, resonant boom continued to echo faintly within the car, a vibration they could feel in their bones more than hear with their ears. A collective unease settled over them. The forest outside seemed to press closer, the shadows between the trunks deepening into pools of absolute blackness. The road ahead remained empty, stretching into a vanishing point they could no longer see. Then, a flicker of movement. Something pale, glimpsed for a fraction of a second in the rearview mirror. Frank's eyes darted up. There was nothing there, just the empty road receding behind them. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight. She was turning her seat, staring out the back window. "See what?" Frank asked, his own nerves beginning to hum. "I don't know," she said. "A light, maybe, like a flash. Back in the trees." Before Frank could answer, the car's engine coughed. It was a small, almost polite sound, but in the deep silence that had fallen inside the car, it was as loud as a gunshot. The dashboard lights flickered, the oil light, the battery light, glowing a faint, ominous amber for a second before going dark again. The steady purr of the engine returned, but the sense of security was broken. Frank tightened his grip on the wheel, his knuckles turning white. He pressed the accelerator slightly, and the car surged forward. The heartbeat sound was gone now, replaced by a ringing silence that was somehow worse. They rounded a gentle curve, and ahead, the forest opened up slightly. On the right, a rough gravel pull-off appeared, overlooking the steep drop to the river below. A simple wooden sign, weathered in gray, read "Scenic Overlook." "I think we should stop," Sarah said suddenly. Her face was pale. "Just for a minute. To get some air. This car feels close all of a sudden." Frank nodded, relieved to be doing something, anything. He signaled, though there was no one for miles to see it, and guided the car onto the gravel. The tires crunched loudly, the sound absurdly domestic in the vast, watchful wildness around them. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immense and crushing. It was the silence of a world without people. No wind, no birds, nothing. The family sat for a moment, none of them moving. "I have to pee," Mia announced, her small voice breaking the spell. "Okay, honey," Sarah said, her voice a little too bright. "Quickly, right here. Don't go near the edge." Frank got out as well, the car door groaning on its hinges. The air was cold and carried a sharp, metallic tang. He walked around to the front of the car, staring out at the view. The river was a dark, twisting snake far below. The opposite side of the gorge was a solid, unbroken wall of green. It was beautiful, but it was a cold, lonely beauty that offered no comfort. He heard Sarah helping Mia nearby. He heard Leo's door open and the sound of his small shoes on the gravel. Frank looked down at the car's hood, at the faded blue paint. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint reflection in it. Not his own, but something moving behind him back near the tree line. He spun around. There was nothing there, only the dark, silent ranks of the trees. A sharp gust of wind blew up from the gorge, whipping around them, carrying with it a sound. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was the sound of a child's laughter, clear, bright, and happy. It was completely out of place in the immense solitude. "Did you hear that?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. He was standing by the car door, looking not toward the road, but deep into the forest where the trees were thickest. "Hear what, sweetie?" Sarah asked, her hand on Mia's shoulder. "The laughing," Leo said, pointing a finger into the gloom between the pines. The family stood together, a small island on the gravel overlook, and listened. The wind moaned softly through the branches. The laugh did not come again, but something else did. From the same direction Leo had pointed, a light flickered. It was not a flashlight beam. It was a soft, phosphorescent glow, a pale greenish blue that pulsed once, twice, and then went out, swallowed by the forest. A deep, primal fear, something old and forgotten, stirred in Frank's chest. "Everyone in the car," he said, his voice low and leaving no room for argument. "Now!" They moved quickly, without question. The doors slammed shut, one after another, the sounds like gunshots in the quiet. Frank turned the key. The engine cranked once, twice, whined protestingly, and then roared to life. He shoved the gear shift in a drive and spun the wheel, spraying gravel behind them as the car lurched back onto the empty blacktop. He pressed the accelerator hard, and the old sedan responded, gathering speed. The forest became a continuous dark smear on either side. No one spoke. They just stared ahead at the road unwinding in their headlights. In the back seat, Mia spoke, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a confusion that was far more terrifying than simple fear. "Daddy," she said, "the laughing girl." She waved at me. Frank's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The road behind them was empty. But for a single heart-stopping instant, he thought he saw two pinpricks of pale green light, like eyes, watching them from the deep green darkness. And then they were gone. The blue sedan raced down the forest highway, a frantic escape from the unsettling events at the overlook. Inside, the silence was a thick, heavy blanket, broken only by the frantic hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers clearing a fine, misting rain that had begun to fall. The earlier warmth of the family car was gone, replaced by a cold dread that seemed to seep in through the very glass and metal. Frank's hands were locked on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His eyes constantly flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of movement, any glimmer of those strange green lights. The trees were a solid, rushing wall on either side, their branches sometimes scraping against the car like skeletal fingers. Sarah reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his arm. "Frank, slow down. The road is wet." Her voice was thin, stretched tight with a fear she was trying hard to control for the children's sake. He didn't want to slow down. Every instinct screamed at him to put as much distance between them and that overlook as possible. But he eased his foot off the accelerator slightly, and the car's speed dropped from a panicked flight to a hurried retreat. The needle on the speedometer quivered back to a number that was still too fast for the conditions. "Did you see her?" Mia's small voice piped up from the back, pulling everyone's attention into the tense space of the car. "The laughing girl?" She had a white dress on. Leo, usually so quick to dismiss his sister's imaginings, stayed uncharacteristically quiet. He was staring out his window, his comic book forgotten on the seat beside him. His face was pale. "There was no one there, sweetie," Sarah said, turning to offer a weak smile. "It was just the wind playing tricks. It can sound like lots of things." Her explanation sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The memory of that clear, disembodied laughter was too sharp, too real. "It wasn't the wind," Leo stated quietly, still not looking away from the window. "It came from the trees." The radio, which had been silent since Frank turned it off, suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static that made them all jump. Then, cutting through the noise, was that same deep, rhythmic beat. Boom. Silence. Boom. It was slightly faster now, keeping pace with Frank's own hammering heart. "Make it stop," Mia cried, covering her ears with her small hands. Frank slammed his palm against the radio's power button. Again, the dashboard light died, but the sound persisted, a faint, throbbing vibration in the metal of the car door and the very seats. It was inside with them. Then, the car's engine coughed again. This time, it was not a polite sputter, but a violent, choking gasp. The whole vehicle shuddered. The headlights flickered, dimmed, and then surged back to full strength. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice rising in pitch. "I don't know," Frank muttered, his eyes darting to the dashboard. All the dials seemed normal. The fuel was fine. The temperature was fine. He pressed the accelerator, but the car responded with a sluggish reluctance, as if it were pushing through deep water. The humming purr was gone, replaced by a labored, wheezing groan. The heartbeat sound from the radio faded away, leaving a silence that was immediately filled by a new sound. A low, whispering rustle like dry leaves skittering across pavement, but it was all around them, coming from the forest itself. It seemed to be keeping pace with the struggling car. The rain fell a little harder, streaking the windows and distorting the world outside into a watery nightmare. The light was failing fast, the leaden sky giving way to an early, murky twilight that deepened the shadows between the trees into pools of ink. "Frank, we need to find a town, a gas station, anything," Sarah said, her voice tight with a controlled panic. She grabbed the map from the floor, her hand shaking as she tried to unfold it. "There has to be something on this map." The car shuddered again, a deep, convulsive tremor. A warning light on the dashboard, a little red engine symbol Frank had never seen before, flickered on, glowing like an angry eye. "Daddy, the trees are moving," Mia whispered, her face pressed to the glass. They weren't moving, not really. But the way the shadows shifted and danced in the failing light and the rain created a terrible illusion of movement. Long, dark shapes seemed to slide between the trunks, keeping perfect pace with the car. The whispering rustle grew louder, now accompanied by a soft, wet tapping sound on the roof, like many small, gentle fingers. Leo let out a sharp gasp. "I saw something. A face." Frank's heart felt like it was going to explode. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look, focusing only on the strip of wet asphalt illuminated by the headlights. The road began to curve, following the edge of the deep gorge. The river below was a roaring, angry sound now, competing with the strange noises around them. And then the headlights died. It didn't happen slowly. They were just gone. One moment, the road was there. The next, they were plunged into an absolute, suffocating blackness. Sarah screamed. Frank jammed his foot on the brake, but the pedal felt soft and unresponsive. The car began to slow, but it was coasting, its engine dead, its power completely gone. The only sound was the rush of the wind and the rain and the terrifying whisper of the forest. The car rolled to a final, silent stop, dead in the middle of the lonely highway. The darkness was complete, a physical weight pressing in on them. The rain tapped its gentle, mocking rhythm on the roof. No one spoke. No one moved. They could hear each other's ragged breathing. Frank fumbled for the interior light switch. He clicked it. Nothing happened. The battery was completely dead. For a long minute, they sat in the utter blackness, listening. The whispering had stopped. The tapping had stopped. There was only the rain and the distant roar of the river. Then a light. It bloomed in the forest to their right, a soft, cool, blue-green glow. It was the same light they had seen from the overlook. It pulsed gently, rhythmically, like a sleeping heart. It was maybe 50 yards away, just visible through the dense weave of branches. Another light appeared a little further down. Then another. Soon, a dozen of them were visible, hanging in the darkness between the trees, pulsing in a slow, silent unison. They cast no light on the ground around them or on the trees. They were just spheres of faint, ethereal light, watching. "What are they?" Leo breathed, his voice full of awe and terror. Before anyone could answer, the driver's side door, right next to Frank, unlocked itself with a loud, metallic clunk that echoed like a gunshot in the silent car. Everyone jumped. Frank stared at the lock button, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. He hadn't touched it. The power was dead. Then, the passenger door unlocked. Then Leo's door. Then Mia's. One after the other, 4 sharp, decisive clunks that sounded like final, terrible decisions. The family sat frozen, for statues in a tomb of glass and metal, surrounded by a silent audience of softly pulsing lights in a rain-soaked forest that held its breath. The road ahead and behind was lost in a darkness, so complete it felt like the world had ended and left only them, and the lights and the whispering silence that now began to return, creeping back in from the trees, closer this time. It was the sound of leaves and something else, something like very soft, very quiet voices, just on the edge of hearing. The locks were undone. The doors were no longer a barrier. The outside world was waiting. The silence in the dead car was louder than any noise. It was a ringing, pressurized void that pressed against their eardrums. The gentle rain on the roof was the only anchor to a reality that felt like it was peeling away, layer by layer. For sets of eyes were fixed on the door locks, their little buttons standing upright like silent, accusing sentinels. Someone or something had unlocked them. Frank's hand shot out, his fingers fumbling in the dark until they found the master lock switch on his door. He pressed it down hard. Nothing happened. The battery was utterly dead. The mechanism refused to respond. "Don't anyone move," he whispered, his voice a dry crackle in the dark. "Don't touch the doors." But the command was useless. The decision had already been made for them. Outside, The softly pulsing lights continued their silent, rhythmic dance. They cast no beams, illuminated nothing but themselves, hanging in the wet blackness like malevolent fireflies. They were waiting. Then, a new sound joined the gentle patter of rain. A soft, scraping noise. It came from the roof of the car. It was the sound of something small and light moving across the metal, dragging slightly. Scratch, scrape, pause. Scratch, scrape. Mia began to cry, a soft, hiccuping sound of pure terror she tried to stifle against her mother's side. Sarah wrapped her arms tightly around her, her own body trembling so violently she feared her bones might shake apart. She stared out the window, her eyes wide with a primal fear. The pulsing blue-green light reflected in her pupils. The scraping on the roof moved from the center towards the edge, directly above Frank's window. It stopped. Everyone held their breath, their gazes fixed on the window, expecting to see something horrible descend into view. Nothing came. Instead, from the forest, the whispering began again. It was clearer now, no longer just a rustle of leaves. It was a chorus of faint, sighing voices, too many to count, all speaking over one another in a language that was just beyond understanding. It was the sound of secrets, of old, forgotten things being discussed just out of earshot. Leo, his face a mask of terrified fascination, slowly leaned forward, peering out his window towards the closest light. "They're calling," he murmured, his voice dreamy and detached. "No, they're not," Frank snapped, a surge of protective anger cutting through his own fear. "It's the wind. It's just the wind in the pines." But he knew it wasn't. The sound was intelligent, purposeful. The scraping on the roof started again, this time moving quickly towards the back of the car. It was followed by a light thump on the trunk lid, as if whatever it was had jumped down. Then, a small, pale hand pressed itself against the outside of Leo's window. It was there for only a second, a small, five-fingered shape against the glass, slick with rain. Then it was gone. Leo jerked back with a strangled yelp, scrambling across the seat and pressing himself against his mother. A hand. A hand was there. Panic finally broke through the frozen terror. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice rising in desperation. "Frank, we have to go. We have to make a run for it." "And go where?" Frank hissed, his mind racing down a dark tunnel with no exit. "Into that." He gestured wildly at the wall of trees and the watching lights. "The road," she insisted. "We'll follow the road back the way we came. There has to be a house, a phone, something." It was a futile plan, and they both knew it. They had driven for an hour without seeing another car or any sign of life. But the alternative, sitting in this metal coffin until whatever was outside decided to come in, was unthinkable. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be gathering around the car, circling them. The pulsing lights drifted closer, their cool glow now faintly illuminating the interior of the car, painting their faces in ghastly shades of green and blue. A sudden, sharp tap on the windshield made them all jump. Then another. It wasn't a finger. It was harder, like a small pebble being thrown. Top, top, top. It was coming from all sides now. A gentle, persistent rain of taps on the glass. On the metal roof, a polite, yet demanding knocking. "They want us to come out," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. Frank made a decision. It was the only one left. "On my count," he said, his voice low and fierce. "We run. Together. We stick together. We follow the road back. Don't look into the trees. Don't stop for anything. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, her face a grim mask of determination. She clutched Mia tighter. Leo grabbed a fistful of his father's jacket. Frank's hand found the door handle. The cold metal felt like a betrayal. He took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. 1, 2, on 3. He shoved the door open and launched himself out into the cold, wet night. Sarah was right behind him, pulling Mia out with her. Leo tumbled out after them, his legs shaky. The outside air was shockingly cold and carried a strange, sweet smell, like rotting flowers and wet earth. The tapping stopped instantly. The whispering ceased. The only sound was their own frantic breathing and the soft rain. The pulsing lights had vanished. The forest was, for a moment, just a dark forest. "Go!" Frank yelled, grabbing Leo's hand and starting to run down the blacktop, back the way they had come. Sarah followed, carrying a sobbing Mia in her arms. They ran blindly into the darkness, their footsteps echoing loudly on the pavement. The road was a faint gray ribbon in the profound blackness. They didn't get far. After only 20 yards, Frank skidded to a halt, his breath catching in his throat. The road behind them was gone. Not blocked, not overgrown. Gone. Where the asphalt should have continued, there was only a wall of ancient, gnarled trees, thick with moss and vines, growing so close together they formed a solid, impassable barrier. It was as if the road had never existed beyond the point where their car had died. They turned, a family unit of pure panic, to look back the way they had come. Their car sat silently, a dark hulk in the road. And beyond it, the road stretched forward into the same impossible, tree-choked oblivion. They were trapped on an island of pavement no longer than a city block, surrounded by an ocean of impossible forest. The whispering began again, not from the trees around them, but from the trees that now grew where the road should be. It was a soft, sighing sound that was almost amused. Then, one by one, the pulsing blue-green lights reappeared. They emerged from the trunks of the new-grown trees, from the ferns at the road's edge, until they were completely surrounded by a silent, watching circle of soft, cold light. From the deepest darkness between two massive firs, a figure stepped onto the road. It was the shape of a young girl, silhouetted against the gloom. She was wearing what looked like a white dress, just as Mia had said. She took one small, hesitant step towards them, then another. She raised one pale arm, and with a small, pale hand, she waved. It was not a friendly wave. It was a summons. And from the forest all around them, in the shadows behind the lights, other shapes began to move. Small, childlike shapes, stepping out from behind trees that hadn't been there moments before. They stood silently, watching, waiting for the family to make the next move. The doors to the car had been unlocked. Now the path into the woods was open. The choice, it seemed, had never been theirs to make at all. The family stood huddled together on the vanished road, a tiny island in a sea of impossible trees and silent, watching figures. The rain had softened to a fine mist that clung to their hair and clothes, making them gleam in the unearthly light of the pulsing orbs. The little girl in the white dress took another step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the wet asphalt. Her wave had lowered, but her hand remained outstretched, palm up, in a gesture that was neither threatening nor welcoming, but simply expectant. "Get back," Frank shouted, his voice cracking with a fear he could no longer control. He pushed Sarah and the children behind him, his own body a futile shield against the circle of light and shadow. The figures at the edge of the forest did not advance. They simply watched, their forms indistinct, little more than smudges of darkness against the deeper dark, but their presence was a physical weight. The whispering began again, but it had changed. It was no longer a chaotic chorus of sighs. It resolved into a single, repeating word, spoken by 100 soft, breathy voices in perfect unison. It was a word that made no sense, a name perhaps, or a place, something old and forgotten. It washed over them, a sound that was felt more than heard, seeping into their minds. "Asarath! Asarath! Asarath!" Mia, trembling violently against her mother's leg, slowly lifted her head. Her tears had stopped. Her face, pale and wet, was now filled with a strange curiosity. "She's not scary," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's sad. She's all alone." The girl in the white dress tilted her head. For a fleeting instant, her features were illuminated by the glow of the nearest orb. She had a small, pale face with dark, empty eyes. There was no malice there, only a profound, endless loneliness that was more terrifying than any monster. She looked directly at Mia, and her outstretched hand curled, beckoning. A powerful urge washed over Frank, a primal need to grab his family and run. But where? The road was gone. The forest was an impenetrable wall. Their car was a dead husk. There was nowhere to run. The only path was forward, towards the waiting girl and the ranks of silent figures. As if in response to his thought, the circle of lights brightened. Their pulsing intensified, the rhythm speeding up until it matched the frantic beating of his own heart. The light did not push back the darkness. Instead, it consumed it, turning the world into a landscape of stark, blue-green contrast. The trees, the road, their own faces, everything was washed in this cold, spectral glow. The whispering name rose in volume, becoming a soft, insistent chant. Asarath! Asarath! Sarah felt a strange pull, a dizziness that wasn't her own. It was as if the very air was vibrating, tugging at her, inviting her to step forward. She fought it, clutching Mia and Leo tighter. "Don't listen," she breathed into their ears. "Close your eyes. Don't look." But Leo was looking. He was staring, mesmerized at the lights. "They're not lights," he said, his voice flat and distant. "They're doors." Before anyone could process what he meant, the girl in the white dress took another step. Then she turned and walked slowly towards the tree line. She didn't look back. She simply expected them to follow. The figures at the edge of the forest parted, creating a narrow path that led into the absolute blackness between two massive, ancient trees that Frank was certain had not been there seconds before. The pull became irresistible. Frank's feet moved without his permission, taking a single, stumbling step forward. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a sound so low it felt like the mountain itself was singing. The mist around them began to swirl, not from wind, but from the vibration, forming into intricate, fleeting patterns that coiled around their legs. "This way, now," a voice cried out, but it wasn't one of the whispering voices. It was sharp, clear, and utterly human. It came from behind them. The spell shattered. Frank spun around. Back towards their dead car, a beam of light, a real, yellow, electric flashlight beam, cut through the eerie glow. A man was standing there, dressed in dark, practical clothing, his face grim and set. He held the light high. "Don't look at them. Don't follow. Run to my voice. Now." It was a lifeline, a chance. Without thinking, without questioning who he was or where he came from, Frank grabbed Leo's arm. Sarah scooped up Mia, and they ran. They ran towards that single, beautiful, normal beam of light. They passed their silent car, their feet pounding on the asphalt that was, miraculously, just asphalt again. The forest erupted. The gentle chanting became a shrill, angry screech that tore at their ears. The pulsing lights flared into a blinding, painful glare. The figures in the trees shrieked and recoiled from the man's flashlight beam, as if it were fire. The man didn't move. He stood his ground, sweeping the light back and forth, holding the frenzy at bay. "Keep going," he yelled. "Don't stop. Don't look back." They stumbled past him, and as they did, Frank caught a glimpse of his face. He was ordinary looking, maybe in his 40s, with a tired but determined expression. And in that moment, Frank saw something else. Looming behind the man, in the darkness just beyond the reach of his flashlight, was something immense. It was a shadow within the shadows, a vast, silent shape of twisted branches and ancient stone that seemed to watch the proceedings with a cold, patient intelligence. It was the source of the humming. It was the heart of the wood. And then they were past him, running down the road. The screaming and the light faded behind them, replaced once more by the simple, blessed sound of rain and their own ragged breaths. The road was there, solid and real under their feet, stretching out into the dark. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave way, collapsing in a heap on the wet shoulder of the road, sobbing with relief and terror. When they finally found the courage to look back, the road was empty. There was no sign of the man, no sign of the lights, no sign of the terrible clearing or the waiting figures. There was only the dark, quiet, normal forest. They were found an hour later by a state trooper on a routine patrol, a family of 4, soaked to the bone and shivering, huddled together on the side of a lonely forest highway. They told their story in broken, hysterical fragments. The trooper listened patiently, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He drove them to the nearest town, to a small clinic where they were checked and given warm blankets. He took their statement, nodding as they spoke of the lights and the girl and the man who saved them. He filed his report. A case of severe highway hypnosis, he wrote. A family, tired and disoriented by the storm and the isolating road, suffered a shared hallucination. Their car, an old model, had likely suffered a coincidental electrical failure. The man with the flashlight? A figment, a desperate invention of a mind seeking rescue. There was no man. There were no lights. The road had always been there. The official report closed the case. But the story never died. It became a legend, a ghost story told along that stretch of highway. People would sometimes report seeing a fleeting blue-green glow deep in the woods, or hearing a child's laughter on the wind. And the family? They were never the same. They moved across the country, but they could never outrun the memory of the cold light, the whispering voices, and the terrible, lonely eyes of the girl in the white dress. They knew what they had seen. They knew what had almost happened. And they knew, with a certainty that chilled them to their souls, that the man with the flashlight had not been a hallucination. He had been real, and he had stayed behind. The mystery was never solved. It simply became a part of the forest, a secret the trees kept, waiting patiently for the next lonely car on a rainy night.